Good morning, Tubaneros. This is a follow-up video to my earlier "The Arabs Don't Need Your Help to Make Democracy Work." You might recall in the last decade the wave of color-coded revolutions that swept through the not yet thoroughly desocialized nation-states of Eurasia, starting with Serbia, then Georgia, on to Ukraine, and unsuccessfully attempted in Belarus. Also a brief flare-up in Lebanon, marking the strategy's first appearance in the Middle East. So I come to this New York Times piece here. U.S. groups helped nurture Arab uprisings from April 14th of 2011. It goes on to say that they're saying the United States democracy-building campaigns played a bigger role in fomenting protests in the Middle East than was previously known, with key leaders of the movements having been trained by the Americans in campaigning, organizing through new media tools, and monitoring elections. A number of the groups, and individuals directly involved in the revolts and reforms received training and financing from organizations like the International Republican Institute, connected with the Republican Party USA, the National Democratic Institute, also connected with the Democratic Party of the United States, all of which received funds from the National Endowment for Democracy, and Freedom House, which receives funds from the State Department. And this is substantiated by interviews with the activists in recent weeks and American diplomatic cables obtained by WikiLeaks. Stephen McInerney, the executive director of the Project of Middle East Democracy, also based in Washington, says that we didn't fund them to start protests, but the training did play a role in what ultimately happened, although it is their revolution. We didn't start it. There's also sponsorship from Facebook, Google, MTV, Columbia Law School, and as well as the State Department. Bashim Fatih, a founder of the Egyptian youth movement, stated that we learned how to organize and build coalitions. This certainly helped the revolution. Ms. Qadi, who is a Yemeni youth activist and had American training in Yemen, stated it helped me very much because I used to think that change only takes place by force and by weapons. Now, she said, it's clear that results can be achieved with peaceful protests and other nonviolent means. There's also a downside when Mr. Fatih noted that the same government that also trained him also trained the State Security Investigative Service, which was responsible for the harassment and jailing of many of his co-workers as well as him. Egypt especially protested this double-faced strategy from the United States. And, of course, the United States assured Egypt, as well as other skeptical governments, that the training was aimed at reform, not promoting revolutions. While this affiliation may have tainted leaders within their own groups, Mr. Mahari, leader of the January uprising in Egypt, was accused of treason for his affiliation with Freedom House, which was described by some members of the movement as a Zionist organization. Okay, well, these orchestrated democratization movements are initiatives based on seminars originated by Gene Sharp, the guru of nonviolent activism in the U.S. Sharp himself, or his star pupils, are the ones coordinating these seminars for activists from around the world, contracted by those mentioned agencies. So does all of this invalidate my earlier video on the Arabs not needing Western help in getting their democratic acts together? Not really. In the first place, it's still the protesters on the ground who are putting their lives on the line, not their cheerleaders in the West. It's still their movement, and they've run much the greater risks to life and limb than was the case in Eastern Europe. Secondly, they naively assumed that American sponsorship of these seminars would translate into automatic support of their movements. In this case, they came up against the real politic of U.S. strategic interest, which is keeping the Middle East safe for oil extraction and Israel. Despite U.S. godfathering of the Egyptian protest leaders, the U.S. still hemmed and hawed when it came down to putting principles over politics. The democracy promoters of the Arab world were in for more ruder awakenings when they acted in Bahrain, Qatar, Yemen, and especially Libya. There it seems the rebels have a U.S. exiled dissident as an important leader who just happened to return to his homeland at a time of crisis. What his other connections to the U.S. might be remain to be seen. In that connection, I have another printout here on the effects of modern weapons on civilians, a bit of hypocritical propaganda in that this question is never asked when it's U.S. weapons dripping through civilian flesh. After some grisly and graphic reportage in a hospital emergency tent, it ends with the death of a 5-year-old girl from a shrapnel wound in the head and the anguished cry from an attending Italian doctor, "It's a shame on Western nations," presumably for not intervening quickly enough, though there's no evidence from the last 10 years to support the view that Western intervention is a cure better than the disease. All of which goes to show that the law of unintended consequences is being ruthlessly enforced as the Western attempt to initiate democratic transformation of the Middle East moved from the safe stateside seminar to the grit and grime of the Arab street. The protesters could not assume that the West would stand by them in a power struggle with longtime clients. And Allah help them should they try this in Saudi Arabia. What this can mean in long-term bitter disillusionment with the West underscores the point that it's not the Arabs who have been resisting democratic change, but rather, as usual, the West, specifically the United States, in not practicing what it preaches, at home as we see on all levels, as well as to them foreign kinds of people out yonder who better learn to do as we say and not as we do. On November 13 of 1974, the Yasser Arafat made his famous speech to the United Nations, where he addressed the General Assembly with a pistol holstered at his waist and extended an olive branch over the rostrum to his audience and said, "I have come bearing an olive branch and a freedom fighter's gun. Do not let the olive branch fall from my hand." But if precedent's anything to judge by, the U.S., Israel, and the rest of the NATO gang will do exactly that. We'll drop the olive branch and the ball yet again as democracy comes heads up against its own strategic interests, and leave another generation of frustrated Middle Easterners wondering why the West just can't get it in dealing with their region or its people. I can knock on the phone. Hello? Monarch and Bacon. You bid Pinochet a pinochle too? I knew you had a 13th guard somewhere up your sleeve. Anyway, you'll believe the Arabs are fit for democracy when you see it. What does that mean concretely? When they accept Israel's right to exist. But that might mean you're accepting the right of the Palestinians and Arabs in general to govern themselves as they see fit. Whoops, the line went dead. So much for that dialogue, again.